All right, man, peace. So, brother, starting next season, LeBron James is going to have to try to stage a coup to regain his throne, or allow whoever has replaced him to maintain that throne and therefore that rulership in the latter part of LeBron James's career. So the question is, who should be considered the new king? In my view, that question cannot be answered until the end of the finals going into next season. As of right now, I've already told brothers that the incumbent king is Giannis Antetokounmpo. Contrary to popular belief, I don't think that it's Kevin Durant, even though I've always had him as my 1A when it comes to the best players in the NBA. I'm just not quite sure if he can lead a team or lead a franchise. He does not exude that type of energy, while Giannis does. So anyway, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
Well, I'm going to start with you. Who will step up and replace LeBron as the NBA's best player?
I think it's going to be Giannis, especially if he's able to get to the finals this year. And if the Bucks win the finals, of course, he's definitely going to be considered the best player in the NBA, because that would most likely mean that he had a mano a mano with Kevin Durant and won. I think that for KD to be considered the best player in the NBA, and I think that he understands this as well, he's going to have to leave Golden State, go to a whole other team, build them up to a championship level, championship contender, and if he were able to win, that would certainly cement him as being the new quote-unquote king in the NBA. As of right now, in my view, Kevin Durant is probably the greatest single weapon to ever touch an NBA basketball floor. But that does not make you the best player. For you to be the best player, in my view, you have to be a leader as well.
I think the process has already started. I think it started quite some time ago, and it's going to be a hard argument to make today because of the performance he put on last night. But the answer is Kevin Durant. I think Kevin Durant's already started to take LeBron James's place. And by the time this argument is done, by the time this case is fully made, we will be in the NBA Finals. We will be past the first round, the second round. We will be all the way to the NBA Finals, and you have to ask yourself who will still be standing. I think there's only three real candidates, and those are KD, Steph, and Giannis. And I
think that you also have to throw James Harden in there as well. I think that James Harden deserves consideration, especially when we view how well he's played over the past 4 years or so. He's been in the conversation for MVP going all the way back to the 2014-2015 season, where he's either finished first or second, predominantly second. He was second in 2015. I believe he was second in 2016 as well. I believe he was second in 2017 as well to Russell Westbrook. And last year, of course, he won it. This year, if he does not win, he's going to finish second to Giannis. So you definitely have to throw James Harden's name in there.
KD has earned over the last 2 years the right to earn the benefit of the doubt. 2 straight Finals MVPs. Shown us willing and capable to step up when you need the shot, when you need the moment. And despite the fact what happened last night happened, I heard you earlier, Stephen A. This can either be a warning sign for the Warriors or it can be a wake-up call.
Obviously, this segment took place in the aftermath of the Warriors' great collapse, losing a 31-point lead to the LA Clippers.
I believe it will be a wake-up call, and we will all be admitting something that many don't want to admit. KD has taken his place as the best player on the planet.
Well, first of all, I would not disagree with you so long as KD gets up and wakes the hell up and understands what's happening to him. He cannot continue to look the way that he's looked in his first 2 games. Getting ejected in game 1, picking up 2 offensive fouls in 47 seconds, getting completely rattled and taken out of his own games, having more turnovers than shot attempts yesterday, and his shot attempts equaling Patrick Beverley. If that continues in this series, I don't want to hear a damn thing about KD. I agree with you.
You know, my contention to many of those allegations that KD, of course, has defended himself extremely well. And I thought that he touched on a lot of things. When he was in OKC and he was taking 20 to 25 shots, he got criticized. He comes to Golden State, a team who everyone knows runs a system that is considered not so much equal opportunity, but find the hot man. They were up by 31 points. They lose a 31-point lead, and everyone wants to focus on KD only taking 8 shots. The real issue that he had was that he fouled out of the game. The refs were calling very bad fouls on him. And due to the fact that he so eloquently stated after the game that all he wants is to be whistled fair, and if Patrick Beverley is allowed to get physical with him, allow him to get physical back, we saw the effects in Game 3. So that's the real issue. The issue is not the amount of shots that he took in Game 2. The issue is that he was not getting a fair whistle in Game 2, and there were no real offensive sets that were called for him in Game 2.
that he's right there. But I don't want to hear anything about him unless he handles his business in this series and stop letting Patrick Beverley get to him. As difficult as that may be, it's a bad look for somebody that wants to be recognized as the best in the world. And what I would also say to you, Will, I would throw James Harden into that equation.
Yes, James definitely deserves to be thrown into that conversation.
We can talk about Steph Curry all we want to. We know how sensational Steph Curry is. We know when he gets going, it's something special to behold. Make no mistake about it. But he ain't the one that averaged 36 this year.
Right, but if we're going to give James Harden credit, it's not just going to be in an attempt to say what Steph Curry didn't do. We also have to take into account that the offensive system that James Harden plays in basically allows him to play one-on-one pickup ball.
This is guy, I mean, he might shoot, better from three-point range or whatever, but he hasn't had to carry the Warriors the way James Harden has had to carry the Houston Rockets franchise.
We've seen Steph Curry carry his team to 2 championship appearances, something that James Harden has never done.
The time has come for us, not just in America, but worldwide, to understand the greatness that we are witnessing from James Harden. Now,
I'll say this. What James Harden has done has been singularly spectacular over the course of the last 2 years especially. But he has to be able to transfer that or translate that into some success in the playoffs. And when I say success, I mean big-time success, championship-level success.
Now, if you want to sit up there and say the Greek Freak, KD, or anybody else, that's fine. That's debatable. But what is not debatable is that James Harden belongs in that conversation where you consider the offensive juggernaut that he is. They beat Golden State, if I remember correctly, guys, 3 or 4 times this year.
Right, but that's a regular season matchup. In the 1992-93 season, the Knicks beat the Bulls 3 out of 4 times. The playoffs came when the Bulls won the series in 6. James Harden is not going to be evaluated. His career is not going to be bolstered by who won the regular season matchup. He has to show up in the postseason against the Warriors next round.
Golden State got them the last time they met. They beat Golden State the first 2 or 3 times that they faced one another. James Harden hit a shot that either won it or sent it to overtime. James Harden is the real deal. He's the reigning league MVP. He's a top 2 candidate for league MVP honors, so it's possible that he might win back-to-back MVP awards. We're not having this conversation without including James Harden in this discussion.
James Harden is absolutely in the conversation. In fact, the names every year nowadays change, except for Harden's in the MVP regular season.
Agreed.
Right? Like, is it Harden or Steph? Is it Harden or KD? Is it Harden?
And Max Kellerman let the record show that in none of those seasons has your boy LeBron James ever been someone who was considered a serious competitor for the person who won the MVP award, even though you guys tried to build up this bullshit case for him last year.
Is it Harden or the Freak? Is it, but it's always Harden right there, and that tells you something. Really what it tells you is he's one postseason run away, one clutch postseason away from taking the crown as the best player in the world. So
I would agree with that. If James Harden wins the championship this year, I would have to put him in that throne, at least for now, even though I think that Giannis is the better overall player and also has a leadership skill set.
Harden's in the conversation. KD has plateaued. KD's not getting any better. He's a great player.
I would agree with that, but I would also have to say, is the current version of KD, and once again, I don't think that he's going to get any better as an overall basketball player, but is this current incarnation of KD good enough to be considered the best player in the NBA? The answer, of course, is yes. All KD is missing is that leadership stamp. That's it.
He's been the same for several seasons, and one of the problems with his move to Golden State is that it's virtually impossible to prove that he's the best.
I agree.
That he's the best player in the league, because Paul George or Kawhi Leonard or an elite two-way wing on that Golden State team, you just add that guy. Of course they're never going to lose. They won 73 games the year before and got to a Game 7 of the title and should have won, really.
So then why are you guys not giving Steph Curry the credit for being a serious consideration in this conversation?
And the year before that, they won the championship. So, of course, if you add a two-way all-star elite wing, they're going to win. It doesn't have to be Kevin Durant. It could have been Paul George or Kawhi Leonard. Hard for KD to prove it under those circumstances, especially when you look at the numbers on Golden State, the plus-minus, the wins and losses. And, in fact, with or without KD, they're virtually the same team. Of course, in high-leverage situations, he's going to help you. But they're virtually the same team.
Let's be for real. The reason why they brought in KD was to offset LeBron James. If LeBron James is no longer the threat that he once was, Golden State does not even really need KD. I've said this for a while now. If he leaves, he leaves. But I think that a very valid and viable replacement for him would be Tobias Harris. I'm not quite sure if they're going to be able to re-sign him. Tobias is playing great for Philadelphia. I don't know what the 76ers cap situation is going to be after this year. But that's what I would be looking at. That's who I would be looking at if I'm Bob Myers, should KD leave. Of course, first you look at Kawhi. But I think that Tobias would fit in even better than Kawhi, because Tobias is a guy who's not going to look to have the ball in one-on-one situations too much.
With or without Steph, they're completely different. So, in fact, he's put himself in a position where Steph looks better than he does. Very tough for KD to prove it.
I don't think that KD has been put in a position where Steph looks better than he does. I just think that Steph is someone who's more of an impact player even than KD. I believe that many of these pundits are assessing KD in the wrong way. They're assessing him and trying to force him into this paradigm, this Jordan, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James paradigm where he's going to be the alpha on a team. That's not KD. KD is your weapon. He's not Megatron. He's Starscream. You understand? He's not the lead guy. And when you start to assess him as that, and this might be controversial, but I've mentioned this in other videos. Kareem is another player who was like that. He was a great weapon, but he wasn't a leader. That's why the Lakers or Milwaukee, they needed a great leader on those squads in order for him to win, or in order for that team that Kareem was on to win. Because he was an incredible weapon in his prime. Kareem was going to give you 30 and 15. But he was not going to be the guy to galvanize the troops. That's KD. And that's why I've stated that, in my view, it's either Kareem or KD who are the greatest weapons in the history of the NBA.
I don't think he's getting any better. Know who is getting better? The Greek Freak. He is significantly better according to all numbers and the eyeball test than he was last year. And given his age and the trajectory of his career, he's still ascending.
Agreed.
So of everyone there who you'd say,
if the Greek Freak gets a consistent three-point shot, wow.
Hey, who would you put your money on as the best bet to take the crown from LeBron? It's the Greek Freak. It's age, it's ascension, it's, by the way, how he's played in the playoffs, it's how he's carried the team.
Steven, oh.
No, go ahead, Molly. I mean,
I was just going to say, I asked you guys who will, and I was going to go to Stephen A on this. Will, feel free to answer it. But who needs to step up? Who needs to step up and
I would say
replace LeBron?
I agree with Steve. That's James Harden as well. Because when we look at all these other players, KD's already won 2. Steph has already won 3. Giannis is still at the stage where he's emerging. So there's no real pressure on him to win a championship this season per se. Right now it's James Harden. James Harden has to win a championship.
I would say that that's James Harden as well. Because guess what? If the Milwaukee Bucks win, which they will this first round, and then they lose to Boston in the next round, or they lose to Toronto in the conference final.
Let me say this. I don't see Milwaukee losing to Boston. I just don't. I've watched Boston in these first 3 games against Indiana. They have not impressed me. They've won all 3 games, but they have not been impressive. All those games have come down to at the very least, the last 6 minutes of the fourth quarter. This is an Indiana team without Victor Oladipo, without their best player. If Victor Oladipo was there, that would be a 7-game series, no doubt about it. And I might have been inspired to pick the Pacers, especially with all of the negativity, volatility, toxicity that the Celtics entered the playoffs with.
Because I still don't believe Orlando is going to beat Toronto, even though I agree with my man Damian Jones. That's going to be a really tough series because Orlando is to be respected. I'm just of the mindset that Milwaukee and the Greek Freak are essentially playing with house money. We expect some things from the Greek Freak, but the word expectation doesn't come attached with the Milwaukee Bucks.
Well, I have to disagree with you a little bit there, Stephen A. Smith. I do expect the Milwaukee Bucks to at the very least get to the 3rd round. They won 60 games. So they're going to have to beat their 2nd round opponent, and I believe that they will. I think that they're going to knock off the Boston Celtics in the next round.
They come attached with the Houston Rockets, at least in terms of go up against Golden State, because outside of Golden State, you don't expect anybody to give them problems in the Western Conference. Obviously, Golden State is coming up the next round. But I'm just simply saying that when you look at Houston, because of what we saw last year, because of what we saw from James Harden last year, because of what we see from him this year, and the load that he's had to carry, and they won by 32 in their Game 1 victory over the Utah Jazz. If you suddenly wet the bed and don't produce in the postseason, it will be a blemish on the career of James Harden, the likes of which I don't believe he'll overcome. Because
he'll be in Charles Barkley territory if he never wins a championship. Because the greater the player that you are, the more people hone in on the fact that you never won a championship if you retire without one.
Because we're looking at him and saying, how much better can you get? We know that the Greek Freak is 24 years old. He's just growing and growing and growing, Max. That's different. James Harden, primarily because of people like you and the things that what you said about him, this is it. You show what he's got.
Absolutely. How old is James? 29? Maybe on the verge of 30? He's in the midst of his absolute prime. He has to get it done. Chris Paul's, 34? Pushing 35? They have to get it done.
Got to show up,
Max,
in this postseason.
I want to jump in because I want to respond to something you just said as well, Max. The answer, I think there's two names. You've changed it now from who will to who will need to show it to gain the title this playoffs. And Stephen.
Well, that's okay that he changed the argument because he already answered the first question.
Stephen A's right on one of the names. It's James Harden. James Harden can claim all the regular season MVPs and be in the discussion for regular season MVP year in and year out. But until it happens in the playoffs, he's not going to take the crown from LeBron. He's not going to beat KD or Giannis in that argument.
Well, LeBron has already lost the crown. That's why you guys are having this conversation. So the question is, who's going to be considered the king of the NBA after these playoffs are over? That's really what this conversation is about.
Argument until he can show exactly, and I don't want to belabor it because you laid it out perfectly, Stephen A., exactly what we expect from James Harden and the Houston Rockets. But the other name that needs to step up to replace LeBron is Kevin Durant. And it's because of people like you, Max. It's because you will constantly look for reasons to discount what he has done.
Agreed. Good point.
Even if he is plateaued, as you point out, even if he's plateaued, well, he's plateaued with 2 straight NBA Finals MVPs. And he has done something that
I think that Max's point, though, is that even though he's plateaued with 2 straight NBA Finals MVPs, how much of that is going to be considered as him being a beneficiary of playing around other great players in a great system, partaking in a great culture?
That I still contend you do not give credit for. And that is he has made his game fit into a winning system. He's shown he can be the best player.
Well, I'm not going to give him too much credit for him fitting into a great system. He came there for a reason. So for him to come there, it wasn't like he was doing them any more of a favor than they were doing him. It was a relatively even trade-off.
On a team in Oklahoma City, and he showed he can also play within a winning system. If we want to say James Harden or Giannis can do that, we have to acknowledge it's just theory. It's projection. We know KD can, but he's going to have to do it again this year to continue to answer critics like yourself, Max. That's why he needs to step up.
The answer to this question, who needs to, is of course James Harden. Because James Harden has so much less around him than Kevin Durant or Steph Curry, for example. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous how much more talent is on Golden State than the Houston Rockets.
Right, but what's inextricably linked with the concept that the Golden State Warriors have more talent than the Houston Rockets is the fact that due to the high basketball IQ that those players have and their ability to play without the basketball, they fit in well together. With the Rockets, I remember that there was a sentiment that Harden might not even be able to fit in well with Chris Paul. Just 2 great players on one team together. And I'm also not buying this concept that the Warriors have so much more talent than the Rockets. I just think that the Warriors' talent fits in well together. If we were to go from the top to the bottom of the Golden State roster and compare it to the Houston roster, it's closer than people think.
Diminished Chris Paul, and then your third best player is Clint Capella, compared to the Golden State Warriors? Come on.
Right, but we also have to consider the system that they play. In the D'Antoni system, James Harden is allowed to run amok. And basically all he needs is an alley-oop guy in Clint Capella. They don't need someone who's going to take shots away from James Harden because Harden does not play well without the basketball.
And yet Harden has him within a breath of beating him last year, and that was without CP3, and he has him playing better than Golden State right now. The only thing that's missing from Harden is a postseason like his regular season. And then he's obviously the best player in the world. That's why he's the MVP.
Well, I would not call him obviously the best player in the world. I would say that he has the throne. But that's a tenuous throne that he'd be sitting on.
Or one of the 2 MVPs where the other name changes every year, but he stays the same. This MVP idea for KD in the finals meaning something about him being the best player in the league is absurd. There's Klay Thompson and Steph Curry on his team. He is always going to be open. How are you going to go? You can't guard everyone. You can't leave their 3-point shooters. Steph has the ball. Of course,
you know what's absurd?
It's so much
saying,
hold on, I'm in the middle of a point. It's absurd. KD, of course, has much less responsibility, and his job is much easier than the superstar on another team like Harden or the Greek Freak. And finally...
Well, I wouldn't say that KD's job is much easier than James Harden or the Greek Freak. Once again, what KD brings to the table, those other two players will not be able to bring to the table if they play with Golden State. So we have to factor in the system.
When you really think about it, who is...
And also, let me say this before Max continues. And many of Max's opponents in these debates have pointed this out. You can't have it both ways. You can't say that the only reason why Golden State brought in Kevin Durant is because they needed him to defeat LeBron. And then when he leads the charge to defeat LeBron, you say, well, they didn't really need him. And he just wins MVPs in the finals because due to the fact that they have Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, he never faces a double team. It's very difficult to double team most of the best players on the best teams because they have great spacing in today's NBA. And the great players are normally out there on the floor with, at the very least, 3 other players who can hit the three-point shot.
Who is it there for? Who is this? Like, if the Bucks win the whole thing, obviously the Freak is the best player in the world. If the Rockets win the whole thing, obviously Harden's the best player in the world. If the Warriors win the whole thing, you think that makes KD the best player in the world?
No, if the Warriors win the whole thing, all that does is confirm the sentiment that KD is the best player in the world in the minds of most people. I wouldn't agree because I need to see KD show some leadership. That's just part of the parameters that I have for a player being considered the best. But I understand the people who have KD as the best.
Even though all the numbers show those team functions without KD and with KD, a very little difference, but without Steph and with Steph, completely different. If anything, it may show something about Steph more than KD.
Well, hey, I've always said that Steph has become the most underrated superstar in the NBA today. You guys have not even mentioned him in this segment.
How does he prove it?
I'm looking for my window to transition. Anybody got to add anything there before I move to football here?
One
Go ahead.
small thing. As long as we're contextualizing absurd, I would just suggest it's not as absurd to claim the guy who's won 2 straight Finals MVPs as the best player on earth than someone who suggests he's not even a top 5 player and toyed with the idea that he's not a top 10 player in the NBA.
That's a great point. Max Kellerman did try to toy with the notion that Kevin Durant is not a top 10 player.
That, I would think, qualifies as absurd.
Never toyed with 10.
All right.
5 is...
Let's keep it moving, fellas. I want to get to some news in the end.
But that's basically it on that. So peace.